I always sensed I was different growing up. I didn't fit with the other boys. While they chased sports and rough play, I was more drawn to dolls and trying on my sister's clothes. Those early differences felt like small, private truths that set me apart, and as I grew older, the sense of not belonging only deepened. I couldn't find comfort in my own skin, and I spent a lot of time imagining what it would be like to be a woman. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept returning, persistent and insistent. It wasn't until my 30s that I finally began to explore that part of myself. I started cross-dressing in private, ordering clothes and makeup online, and hiding them from my wife. Those secret moments were small rebellions, small freedoms, and they felt liberating. For the first time, I was letting myself act on something I had long suppressed. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tell my wife. Her reaction surprised me. She was accepting. She offered to help with makeup and styling, and that unconditional support felt like a huge relief. Having someone I loved understand me made a heavy part of my life feel lighter. Not long after, a new doctor picked up on something unexpected during a routine physical. My hormone levels were imbalanced. He recommended testing for hypogonadism, a condition that can cause low testosterone. The results confirmed the diagnosis. The doctor suggested estrogen therapy to rebalance my hormones. At first, I felt cautious. I had never considered hormones as part of my life. The idea of taking them raised questions about how my body and my sense of self might change. Yet curiosity and a quiet excitement began to creep in. I read about what estrogen could do, softening skin, developing breasts, reshaping the body in ways that might align with how I had always felt inside. That mixture of fear and hope pushed me toward a decision. I started taking estrogen. The changes didn't happen overnight. At first, there was almost nothing noticeable. After a few weeks, I began to feel things subtly shifting. My skin became softer and, to my amazement, my chest began to develop. Those early signs brought a wave of euphoria I had never known. At the same time, a new kind of anxiety started to grow. I found myself asking whether I was truly ready to take further steps, whether I wanted to transition fully, whether I even knew what that would mean for my identity. Those doubts became intrusive. I felt unable to simply stop the hormones and equally unable to confidently say yes to surgery or irreversible changes. As estrogen's effects continued, my internal conflict intensified. My breasts kept growing and my body felt increasingly feminine. Initially, I thought the changes might fill a long-standing emptiness. Instead, they opened a new, terrifying unknown. I worried constantly about how friends, family, and most painfully, my wife, would respond if I continued toward a full transition. My supportive wife had helped me through cross-dressing. Would her love endure if I presented as a woman? Would she see me the same way? Those questions haunted me and led me inward. I withdrew from work, retreated from social life, and spent my days alone, trying to sort the tumult in my head. One afternoon, my wife found me crying. She sat beside me and asked what was wrong. At first, I couldn't find the words, but eventually I told her everything. The doubts, the fear of change, the uncertainty about whether I was ready to live as a woman. She listened without judgment, holding my hand as I let the pressure of months pour out. When I finished, she looked at me sadly and then said something that surprised me with its quiet certainty. She told me she understood how difficult it was to figure out who you are, and that she had sensed how much I'd been struggling. Hearing that acknowledgement calmed me. Even though we didn't arrive at any decisions in that moment, her compassion made me feel less alone. In the days that followed, I began to come back to life in small ways. I reconnected with friends and returned to work, though the feeling of being unsettled lingered. Each morning I met a changing reflection. Softer facial features, smoother skin, a chest that had become undeniably present. That daily unfamiliarity was frightening. I wasn't sure who I saw in the mirror. Yet a steady truth remained, my love for my wife. Her presence and support anchored me and gave me strength to keep going, even though the path ahead was unclear. As weeks passed, my ambivalence continued to pull me in opposing directions. My wife tried to be patient and supportive, but I could see her frustration grow. She wanted me to be well, but she also wanted me to choose a direction so we could both move forward. One evening, she sat me down and spoke plainly. She loved me, but she couldn't keep watching me suffer in limbo. I understood she was right. This state of constant uncertainty was unsustainable, but knowing what I wanted remained difficult. I kept repeating that I didn't know if I could handle all the changes, if I could become the person I had imagined and still keep the life I valued. Through all of this, the central tension of my experience remained. A yearning to be true to an inner reality and a fear of losing what I loved. Sometimes the yearning felt overwhelming and clear. Other times the fear took over and I wondered whether I had rushed into something I could not reverse. My wife's love and the knowledge that she would stand by me whatever path I chose was the single bright thing I clung to. Together, in spite of the uncertainty, we continued talking, stumbling forward, trying to figure out how to balance my evolving needs with the life we had built. The road ahead was anything but certain. Each day brought new questions about identity, about expectations, about the practical and emotional consequences of changing my body. Even so, having someone who listened, who stayed with me through the fear and the joy, made the future feel less impossible. I didn't have answers, only a mixture of hope and trepidation. But with my wife beside me, I had the courage to keep exploring one tentative step at a time. She nodded, then spoke gently but firmly. "I understand," she said, "but you can't stay stuck in this halfway place forever. It's not fair to you and it's not fair to me." Her words landed with a clarity I had been avoiding. She was right. I couldn't drift in indecision endlessly. At some point I had to choose a direction. Still, fear tangled with conviction. What if I picked wrongly? What if regret waited for me on the other side? I voiced that fear. What if I regret it? I asked, my voice small. She took my hand and squeezed it, steadying me. "There are no wrong choices," she replied. "There are different roads," she said, "and whichever one you walk, I will walk with you." That simple, unconditional promise steadied me. The pressure of not knowing eased enough for me to decide. I couldn't remain suspended between lives. I needed to commit and accept the consequences that followed. So I made the choice to transition fully. The decision was anything but sudden or simple. It had been shaped by years of longing, by the relief I felt as my body began to change, and by the quiet certainty that living half a life was no longer tolerable. At first, my wife met the news with hesitation. Understandable doubt when everything about us was shifting, but her reluctance softened into support. She became my ally, helping me locate a reputable surgeon, researching options, and offering a steady emotional presence through the long preparations. The months before surgery were a strange mix of mundane tasks and profound inner work. I filled my closet with new clothes, learning fabrics and cuts, and experimented with makeup until my hands remembered the motions. I practiced speaking in a softer register and worked with a therapist who helped me name and process the grief, joy, and fear that swirled together. Each small ritual, trying on a dress, smoothing concealer under my eyes, felt like rehearsal for a life I had hoped for, and also like a rehearsal for loss. There was no escaping the reality that the surgery would change everything. When the day arrived, the swirl of emotions intensified. Terror, anticipation, fierce hope. My wife sat with me as nurses prepared me for the operating room. Her presence, warm and human, steadied me. When they wheeled me away, holding her hand felt like holding the world in place. The operation itself was a difficult, disorienting blur. Waking up, pain and relief arrived together. Pain that reminded me of the price of change, and relief that the choice I had carried so long had finally begun to be realized. Recovery was slow and humbling. I depended on my wife more than I expected. She changed bandages, helped me in and out of clothes, and learned to read my moods when I couldn't. She taught me how to walk in heels without judgment, celebrated small milestones, and reminded me to be patient with healing. As my body settled into its new shape, rounder hips, a fuller chest, I noticed how the world began to respond differently. Strangers addressed me as ma'am. I felt the tickle of surprises in their eyes when they gleaned my history. The external recognition both thrilled and frightened me. I had longed for authenticity, but the reality of living visibly as a woman came with complexities I hadn't fully imagined. There were awkward, sometimes cruel moments. Small slights and blatant objectification arrived where they hadn't when I moved through life as a man. Men catcalled or made comments I found unsettling. Other women occasionally dismissed me or underestimated my competence. Those shifts stung and revealed how social treatment is often shaped by gender. My wife was my compass in those moments. She coached me on setting boundaries, on responding in ways that protected my safety and dignity, and she reminded me I didn't have to absorb every slight. Her practical advice, how to steer a conversation, when to remove myself from a space, mattered as much as her shoulder to lean on. Finding community changed everything. I began to attend support groups and met other trans women whose stories echoed my own and diverged in important ways. Their experiences offered both cautionary notes and fierce inspiration. In that circle, I found mentorship, laughter, shared tactics for dealing with the world, and quiet solidarity in nights when the future felt heavy. Those relationships were balm. They allowed me to celebrate progress and to grieve losses without explaining myself to people who felt distant or unsure. My ambitions shifted, but did not vanish. I had always been drawn to science, and despite the reality that the field could be inhospitable to women, especially trans women, I didn't want to give up that part of myself. I enrolled in graduate study in biology, diving into research with a renewed sense of purpose. The classroom and the lab became spaces where I could prove my abilities to myself first, and then to others. It wasn't seamless. Microaggressions surfaced, doors sometimes remained closed, and I had to work harder to assert my place. But I also discovered a resilience I hadn't known I had, and a clarity about what I wanted to accomplish. Over time, the new version of everyday life settled. I learned makeup techniques. I experimented with dresses, colors, and hairstyles until I developed a style that felt like mine. Compliments from women about outfits or beauty tips became a small delight, and some men treated me with admiration that felt both flattering and uneasy. The shifts in how others saw me were often subtle and sometimes jarring, but they also confirmed the truth I'd carried inside. Aligning my outward life with my inner sense of self was profoundly liberating. Public speaking became another outlet. I began to tell my story at community events and university panels, not because I wanted attention, but because there were people who needed to hear someone say, "It gets complicated and you're not alone." Sharing my journey, its messiness, its triumphs, felt purposeful. I volunteered with a local LGBTQ+ organization, offering support to those navigating transitions and advocating for trans rights. Doing that work made my struggles meaningful in a new way. Helping others find their paths helped me feel that my own choices had broader value. That's not to say doubt evaporated. There were nights I stood in front of the mirror and questioned if I was living up to some internal standard, or if I was merely performing an image of womanhood I felt expected to inhabit. Pressure from society, from old friends, and even from my own inner critics sometimes obscured the quieter truth that I had done the bravest thing available to me. I had pursued an honest life. Throughout all of it, my wife remained the constant I leaned on. She reminded me of progress when I couldn't see it myself and celebrated the person I was becoming. Her willingness to stay, to learn, and to love me as I changed made the transitions feel less like loss and more like mutual growth. We rebuilt a relationship on new terms, sometimes awkward, sometimes tender, but always rooted in shared history and commitment. Looking back, what mattered most wasn't the particular sequence of surgeries, or the wardrobe, or the career wins. It was the simple fidelity to a life that finally matched my interior truth. I had spent decades denying parts of myself, and freeing those parts felt like reclaiming time I had lost. The journey didn't erase pain, stigma, or struggle, but it brought me closer to wholeness. I kept moving forward, pursuing science, advocating for others, and deepening friendships I had once been too afraid to nourish. I learned to accept that confidence and uncertainty can coexist, and that being brave does not mean never doubting. It means choosing nonetheless. In the end, I discovered that living honestly with love beside me was more than an ending. It was the start of a life I could finally recognize as my own.